Um, Dr. Olmos, are we waiting for any other attendees?
No, this is it. Phil, are you ready to get it started for the broadcast?
Yes, let me just make sure we're on. Okay, yes, we are live now.
Great, good afternoon. Welcome to our Opportunity Youth Academy board meeting. I am Mary Ann Dewan, County Superintendent of Schools and board member of the Opportunity Youth Academy. And just acknowledging as we kick off this meeting that I am present and I accept the agenda for this meeting and will begin with a statement. On behalf of the Opportunity Youth Academy board, thank you for joining us for our virtual board meeting. I appreciate your support and flexibility. We continue to operate in accordance with state and county public health officials' response to the COVID-19 virus situation, including conducting these board meetings via video conference. For our agenda, again, I will call this meeting to order. So I am here and I adopt the agenda for today's meeting. For public comment, while the community is viewing remotely, there are opportunities still for public comment. If you would like to make a public comment on an agenda item of your choice, comments must be submitted online. The link is posted on the streaming website and can also be accessed at https://forward/public-comment-9-10-2020. Moderator, do we have any public comments?
Not at this time, Dr. Dewan.
Great, thank you. So today's meeting will be focused on holding a public hearing on our 2020-2021 Learning Continuity and Attendance Plan, or the LCP. California Education Code Section 43509B4 requires school districts, schools, charter schools, and county offices to hold a public hearing to solicit recommendations and comments of members of the public regarding the descriptions and expenditures proposed in the Learning Continuity and Attendance Plan. The meeting for the adoption of the Learning Continuity and Attendance Plan shall be held after, but not on the same day as the public hearing. The Opportunity Youth Academy Board will now conduct a public hearing on the 2020-2021 Learning Continuity and Attendance Plan that Opportunity Youth Academy will submit to the California Department of Education. For our presentation this evening, we will ask staff to present an overview. We'll take time for Q&A, and then we'll close the public hearing. So to begin, Director Morales, will you present an overview of the LCP?
Yes, I will. Thank you, Dr. Dewan. I'm going to share my screen. I have a small PowerPoint that I can share at this time. Is that okay?
Yes, please go right ahead.
There we are. So this is the Learning Continuity and Attendance Plan, also known as the LCP, for Opportunity Youth Academy, September 10th, 2020. So the LCP template has 7 parts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 parts. The first part is our general information, the stakeholder engagement, continuity of learning in person, continuity of learning, distance learning, mental health and social and emotional well-being, pupil and family engagement and outreach, school nutrition, increased and improved services. The first part, as I said, is the general information. This gives some basic information to those that would read our LCP. What is Opportunity Youth? what's our mission, what's our goal, who do we serve. Have some notes. What I do want to note before we look at the template, I want to just point out that for OYA, moving from our blended learning model to a distance learning model was challenging, but not as challenging as some districts may be experiencing at this time. Simply because, one, our curriculum is all online, was prior to moving into distance learning. And two, our blended learning model was split up as what we call a 60-40. 60% was online, meaning students were working independently at home and checking in with teachers. And the 40% were students coming into the sites, working with teachers in pairs one-on-one. So the biggest shift for us was that 40%. How do we keep students engaged? How do we continue to check in with them virtually? How do we provide all the same services, the navigator services, academic counseling, college and career liaison, our career labs, our check-in, our mental health support virtually? Prior to going full distance learning, most of those services, if not all of them, were done at site, meaning they were there, the support staff were going into the sites, checking in with students physically that were there. So that was the biggest shift for us, and working with the staff on how do we continue to provide those services through Zoom, through phone calls, Remind. So that really was the focus of the LCP for us. Stakeholder engagement. So our engagement process started in June 2020 and really came up until August. And by that, I mean, we started to really think about how are we going to get feedback from our stakeholders, our parents, our staff, our students, about distance learning. Where are they at? How are they feeling about a possible return? What were the needs that students saw for them to continue in a distance learning model? And so we pushed out some surveys to parents, to staff, to students. Unfortunately, we didn't get responses from parents. We did do calls and we do reminds, but we weren't able to really get a whole lot of parent feedback. All our staff replied, and our students, we had about 61 responses from our students. And then we took that information and we talked about it in our staff meetings. I shared it with our school site council. And we had also last night at our governance council an opportunity to look at the LCP and gather some feedback from our governance council members. So 3 focus areas that we were able to identify from the surveys and the meetings that we had was, 1, a focus to continue a robust and rigorous virtual learning environment. Again, how do we continue to provide the in-person services like career labs, the small group cohorts that we had started, academic counseling, the things I had just mentioned? How do we continue to provide that for our students? Because that was really important for them. In the survey responses, that was very important for them to continue. The online curriculum and the access to that, they already had prior to distance learning. Opportunity for daily interaction with staff and teachers. This, again, was a huge indicator from our students that they really felt that they wanted to still stay connected with our staff and our support and our teachers virtually, daily, checking in with them, making sure that they had everything they needed. Were they okay? Did they need employment services? Those types of services. Whereas before, students can come in and talk to the teacher in person. To do that, or we had a navigator at site. Moving it to a virtual environment was a little more challenging. And so our staff and teachers had to create office hours and get that out to our students as soon as possible. And then supportive and strategic mental health approach for our students. Again, this was kind of thinking for our mental health therapist, You need to have Zoom meetings, Zoom counseling meetings, on the phone meetings, really kind of taking it outside of that in-person setting time to go and meet the student at the site. And so those are the three focus areas that we identified, and that was the feedback from our stakeholders. So the third part of the LCP is the in-person instruction offerings. And in the LCP, the direction that we received was, if you had to go eventually to an in-person instructional model, what would that look like? What were some of the things that you would need to successfully transition back into an in-person model? And from the feedback that we received, the first thing was health and safety measures that will be in place. And that was clear from our staff and our students, that they wanted to be sure that they had the protective equipment, the face masks, the gear that they need to be in a setting, making sure that we practice safe distance, social learning distances, making sure that there was correct flow in the classroom, and making sure that we continued with the cohorts that they had started prior to distance learning, but of course a smaller cohort, and schedule those out regularly so that students felt safe enough to return. Not all students really wanted to. They wanted to continue with distance learning, and so we made sure that we would address their needs or keep them on a distance learning path. But if and when in-person does, we do reopen, we discussed maybe starting with a hybrid instructional model, which would look like kind of the blended learning, but we would limit the in-person to just the small groups and not have students dropping in like we had before. Making sure that those small groups are the target of those small groups are our EL students, our students with IEPs, since those are our students that really need more of that in-person support. So making sure that we made those small groups to include those students. But then everything else would still remain as online distance learning. And then as we get back into the traditional model for us is that blended learning 60-40. So we would have the small groups still happening, but then start including more of the drop-ins, the one-on-one that we had prior to distance learning. Our distance learning program, again, it wasn't a very challenging transition for us, since we were already doing a form of distance learning. But what we wanted to make sure that in the continuity of instruction, that students were getting the check-in that they needed virtually. So that is that teachers having office hours and making sure that they were checking in with those students during those designated times, creating small groups and finding ways to work with those small groups virtually, making sure that our EL curriculum, which is our eloquence curriculum, was aligned with our SciTech curriculum. And then our IEP meetings, transitioning those to a virtual meeting and continue following those timelines. Access to devices and connectivity. That was really the very first step we made sure before the end of the school year last year, was to make sure that our students had Chromebooks and hotspots. So we immediately sent out to all of our students a very small survey of, do you have a Chromebook and do you have a hotspot? Or what tech device do you have and what would you need? And so we were able to get those numbers back and purchase Chromebooks and hotspots and provide those devices to our students pretty quickly. Track daily student participation and progress. For OYA, one of our requirements is engagement logs. So that's something that we had been doing prior to distance learning. So we just continued with those engagement logs, but trying to really do those daily as opposed to weekly or monthly. We wanted to be sure that we looked at that engagement log that we were using in the past and adjusted it to what we needed to use moving forward. One of the things I want to point out is because we're a non-classroom based school, the requirements under SB 98 don't necessarily apply to OYA, but what I wanted to do is align to those requirements as closely as we possibly can. Just because I think those are some great practices that are in the under SB 98. Some of them that we're already doing and that we could probably improve for us. Distance learning, professional development, certainly. We provided Zoom training. How do you use Zoom? How do you use breakout sessions? These were platforms that our teachers were not used to. But we did some professional development in June with them, and then SciTech provided some professional development at the beginning of the year on how do you create a lesson plan for virtual learning? How do you use Zoom? How do you use Google Classroom? Some of those types of platform professional development that our teachers need. Staff roles and responsibilities. Yeah, this is the best part of OYA is the staff tend to just kind of continue what they're doing and then step in and say, where do we need to take responsibility or step into a role? I know that when Dr. Everett moved over to AED, there was the tech distribution that she was managing. There was, she was overseeing the IEP process. There was a lot of things that she was doing that some of my navigators stepped in and said, I'll do the tech distribution. Another navigator, Lucas, said, I will do the orientation. Susan Montano said, I'm going to manage the IEPs and help in that regard. So that's the great part of OYA is our staff just really steps in and fills the gaps. And then supports for pupils with unique needs. Our OYA students, they all have unique needs. So finding ways to make sure that we are gathering information from our students on what kind of supports do they need in addition to academic, their IEP support, EL, foster youth, homeless, and so on. Our pupil learning loss. This is one thing about our students is they come to us with already some gaps in their learning. So we're always trying to find ways to help support them in their learning loss. Going into distance learning, one of the things, again, that we certainly noticed right away was technology and our students not having the devices that they needed. Another thing that we noticed is our small group in person were largely successful in math and reading. So how did we continue that in a virtual environment through Zoom? And then certainly making sure that our EL population, we're using eloquence. We're checking in with them more often, same with our foster youth and our students with IEPs. Mental health and social well-being, our mental health therapist, her caseload has increased significantly. She is checking in with a lot of students, holding a lot of groups, making sure that students, if their students aren't getting the services that they need through her, she's making sure she's making those referrals out to the organizations that will help support our students. Funny thing is that she just recently told me that even some of our graduates are reaching out to her still because our students they're struggling in this time. And so making sure that we're there for them to talk through some of the anxieties and stresses that they are experiencing now, and then connecting them with the professionals that need to continue to help them. Our pupil and family engagement and outreach, getting that information out to our families through Remind, through letters, through our email, on our website, was a huge activity that we did at the end of last year and continue to do it. I know that Sobrato and Conexión did a virtual back to school night that was pretty successful. And so I hope that the other sites will do the same very shortly here or in the next month or so. But this is important to us that we continue to update our families on what we're doing and what resources are available for them. School nutrition, although we don't provide necessarily school lunch bags and nutrition, we are sure to get information out to our families on when or where they can, where food distribution is available for them, like Conexión, I know have distribution opportunities, but then also pointing them to the different resources, websites that are providing those services for our families and students. And so our increase in improved services, I highlighted two things here, again, which is our Chromebooks and our hotspots. We continue to buy more Chromebooks and we have hotspots ready. And if we need to purchase more, we will, as our enrollment continues to grow. One of the things that we do now, after our orientation with students, we will immediately get them a Chromebook and that hotspot before they meet with their teacher. And then mental health services would love to increase more services for our students. If that could be even another mental health therapist. I know that her caseload is growing pretty significantly, and I believe that there's going to be more need for that this year. And that's my presentation, and I can certainly take questions. Dr. Dewan.
Thank you, Director Morales. I do have a couple questions. The first question I have is, you mentioned for mental health services and both current and former students, are we able to make referrals, and are we able to follow up to see if our students and our former students are making connection to the places that we're referring them and actually getting connected to service? Because getting referred is one thing, actually taking advantage, being signed up for, and continuing to connect with the service is something very different.
Yes. So at this time, I know that the referrals are being made. The follow-up piece of it, I believe, can be a bit challenging, getting information back from organizations if the student has actually has made connection with some of the services. We're asking students if they have, and if they didn't, why not, and how can we? What was the reason why? But as far as having a more formal system in place where there is this checking in or follow-up, that has not been developed yet. It is something that I know was brought up at our governance council meeting last night when our navigators presented on the resource link system that we have, where we are doing a needs assessment for our students. We're collecting that information, making referrals out to organizations, and then finding a way to follow up and making sure that they are getting the services. And that was discussed at the governance council meeting last night. And one of the recommendations that came out of that was just having more personnel to do that kind of work, to do the follow-up. But it's definitely something that we need to figure out or find a way to get that information from organizations.
I think if it's not something that's actively planned for, it isn't going to happen. And so I think while it may not be directly connected to the LCP, I do think it is connected to some of the requirements and expectations of the LCP. So I would like to see some modification to the LCP that would include action planning around tracking referrals and also ensuring that services are being accessed by our students. I do think it's a possibility that there's a role of the navigators in that work. And so I'm pleased to hear that it was discussed at Governance Council, and perhaps there were some good recommendations that came out of that dialogue that could also be moved forward in future action planning. My other question was related to mental health, and you had mentioned needing additional staff. Is that a recommendation in the LCP? Is it built into the budget? Where does that thinking stand?
It's not a recommendation in the LCP, and the budget, because we just received our Title IV, I want to take a look at that and see if we can. Currently, we have a contract with Therapy Travelers, so that's how we receive, or that's how we have our mental health therapists. So I'd like to research that a little more and see what would it cost to potentially maybe add, even if it's a half-time person at this point, and increase if we need to. But I believe there could be some funding there that I could find in some of our title funds. Yeah.
It sounds like it would be very appropriate use of those funds. And given the needs of our students, I'd like to see it built in as something that is designed with sustained funding versus the one-time funding. So looking at the title resources sounds appropriate. I think we should make that a high priority given what we already know about the trauma impacts of COVID and the isolation and the separation, as well as we know that there are some racial inequities that have been exacerbated during this time of shelter in place. So I believe highly and very strongly encourage some efforts on your part to ensure that we're staffed appropriately with regard to mental health and wellness. Additionally, moving forward, considering what are some of the wellness preventative factors or functions of our mental health therapist. For example, could there be some groups that are held, or support sessions, or just check-ins with peers to help build more of a sense of community, and also to help each other leverage some of the resources that they may be aware of. I don't think everything has to result in a service or a referral into deeper end. I think there's a way to build more prevention through having a community that's welcoming and belonging, and building a support network.
Okay.
So considering what are the possible roles of the mental health therapist, and maybe even empowering some of the young people to develop some skills to facilitate some of those peer support groups, or peer groups could be very helpful. So I'd like to hear more about that. I see in the LCP you mentioned resources will be provided to address trauma and other impacts. So I think what I'm asking is just a little more specificity about some of the ideas or timeline of when we might get more updates about what are those resources, and how can we increase the capacity of the program to address the trauma impacts.
Okay.
From the moderator, are there any public comments on the LCP?
Let me take a look here. I see no comments at this time, Dr. Dewan.
Okay, thank you. I do have one last question then on the LCP.
Yes.
You mentioned about the hotspots and having them on hand, as well as providing them. What kinds of check-ins are we able to do to ensure that the hotspots that we're providing actually work in the area in which the student is living, and also that it has the capacity, the bandwidth necessary to support distance learning, and that their service isn't being throttled or in some other way negatively impacting their connectivity? Are we troubleshooting that, or is there some way that we can get good information about how well the hotspots are actually working and that they're being used by our students?
Right. So with the Khajiits, which is the devices that we purchased directly from Khajiit last year, though those devices we received reports, printouts of how often are the students using the Khajiits? Are they using them at capacity? What websites are they accessing? I believe we can see the filters and what they're using, um, and um, and and we've had very little issues with the Khajiits, other than students maybe running out of data. I guess if that's what, I'm not a techie, but and that's simply because either they've viewed a YouTube video in Schoology that kind of took up too much data. And so what we can do for some of those devices is shift some of that shared data around to accommodate the students. The T-Mobile devices that were just recently purchased, I'm not sure, and Dr. Almos, could you help me with that? I don't know if there are reports that are being provided to the IT department on those devices.
I'm not aware of any reports, but I can follow up with technology on that.
Okay.
Also, Director Morales, were you aware of the AT&T hotspot program, and did you submit any device needs through that program, our partnership with the City of San Jose?
We did, and I believe we received 100 devices from that program. So what we plan on doing is taking those 100 devices, replacing them with the students in San Jose that are using Khajiit's devices or the T-Mobiles that we bought, and swapping those out, giving them those hotspots, and then redistributing those the Khajiit and the Khajiit and the T-Mobile to students that are out in Gilroy, students that are out in Milpitas. So just kind of but we did, yeah, and we applied and we did get some.
And will that then satisfy the full need so that every student in the program has a device and a hotspot?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep. I would like to keep more on hand. As I said, we're growing. So, what's great about what we're doing now with the IT department, as we're ordering them, they're keeping them in inventory, and we're getting devices as we need them from IT has been a great collaboration with them.
Thank you. So this brings us to the end of our public hearing. It is 4:32, and this public hearing is now closed. We will take action on the request to approve the LCP at the September 24th, 2020 OYA Board Meeting. We'll go on to our next agenda item, which is an action item on the renewal of our DOS status. The DOS is the accountability system for alternative programs. And I will ask you, Director Morales, to provide us with an overview.
Right, so I don't have a PowerPoint for this. This is just what we did every 3 years. Let me back up. So alternative education, by the nature of their program, automatically get DOS status. However, schools like OYA, which we are not necessarily identified as alternative education, have to petition or apply to gain DOS status, which that basically means that there are indicators in the dashboard that are unique to alternative ed programs like OYA. If we didn't do this, then we would be part of just the regular DOS dashboard, and those indicators really apply to more of the traditional school settings. So 3 years ago, we applied for DOS status. We were granted certification. That was 3 years ago. So now we are recertifying. I did part 1, which was how are we eligible? And we're eligible because we serve more than 70% high-risk students. That's one of the populations. So I submitted that. They granted that portion and then asked us to bring the certification to you for approval. The next step would be, once you approve tonight, I would send a letter or I would send you a letter that would go to the governing board, the SCOE board, and as notification, and then submit our certification to the CDE.
Do you mean to the authorizing board,
Yes,
to
thank you.
the Santa Clara County Board of Ed, because they're the authorizer?
That's correct. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, no, not a problem. Thank you. So I'll take action now to approve our application for dashboard alternative school status and our eligibility certification. So your request is approved
Thank you.
to renew. Next item is the informational item on our WASC accreditation status.
Yes, so I can finally announce to you, Dr. Dewan, that we received our letter from the commission, and they have granted us a 6-year accreditation with a mid-year visit. So we have accreditation until 2025, 26, I can't remember exactly when. But we were very excited to get that, and I just want to congratulate the staff for the work that they did. It was a heavy lift, but they did it, and they did a fantastic job. So I just wanted to share that with you and celebrate their work.
Well, thank you very much. I know that we've mentioned it a couple of times at previous meetings, and I don't think we should ever hesitate to continue to celebrate the amazing work of staff. In particular, I know this was an unusual accreditation period and cycle, required a lot of extra staff time, in addition to staff being present on the weekend to meet with the visiting team that came to see our sites. And our staff and our students were just extremely articulate about what Opportunity Youth Academy affords them. So I do join you in congratulating the staff, and also I congratulate you, Director Morales. We did receive official notification on July 8th, 2020, that the decision was to grant accreditation through June 30th of 2026. So again, congratulations.
Thank you, Dr. Dewan.
I also just, I always think it's important to take a minute or two to celebrate, and then it's a reminder that just means we have a lot of work ahead of us and more to do to get ready and document. 2026 will be here before we know it.
Yes, it will.
So we want to sustain all the good efforts and good work that went into receiving that level of accreditation.
Absolutely.
So at this time, I will take action to adjourn our meeting. I want to thank everyone for joining us, and the next OYA board meeting is scheduled for September 24th, 2020. I look forward to seeing you all then. This meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, Dr. Dewan.